Couple warnings at the top of this video. First, this will be one of my most overtly political videos. While I've never been an apolitical YouTuber, I also typically try to be broadly educational and positive versus directly talking about current events, but given the state of the world and my growing need to talk about this and my frustration and anger about US policies in particular, I feel like I have a duty to make videos like this. And as Picard says, being alive is a duty as well as a right. Also, this video is going to mention a certain worldwide event that is affecting all of us right now, and since I can't refer to that thing by name without risk of demonetization, and I currently really need to think about my finances going forward considering, again, this specific thing, I'm going to refer to it as the phage in order to talk about it. But just know when I say the phage, I'm not talking about a nominally interesting storyline from Star Trek Voyager's early seasons, but, you know, the other thing. How silly I look in this hat. No, the other thing. We all know what I'm going to be talking about. In Star Trek Picard's first season, we discover a Borg cube that has been disconnected from the larger Borg collective and falls under the control of what remains of the Romulan Star Empire. The Romulans begin to de-assimilate the Borg on the cube, taking their parts in order to be sold for profit, with the nominally added benefit, at least to Romulan eyes, of happening to rescue former Borg from the horrors of the collective. And in order to facilitate this project, the Romulan Empire, which has limited resources after the destruction of their homeworld, asked the Federation for help, beginning an exchange program where Federation doctors and scientists, all citizens of the Federation, come to the cube in an errand of mercy and science to save and study the former Borg, the XBs as they like to be called, while the Romulans get to keep the profit of the Borg equipment. Notably, a former Borg as well as a Federation citizen comes to the cube to administrate this Federation effort. His name is Hugh, who had himself been de-assimilated several years earlier by the crew of the USS Enterprise D, as seen in Star Trek The Next Generation episode I, Borg. But here's where we get to an interesting distinction. Hugh was de-assimilated within Federation borders by a Federation crew, and is noted to be a Federation citizen within the fiction of Star Trek Picard. Meanwhile, all the XBs on the cube fall under Romulan jurisdiction, and thus do not gain the protection and rights afforded to Federation citizens like Hugh. Now, in our real world, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations in 1948, states that, quote, everyone has the right to a nationality, and that, quote, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his or her or their nationality, nor denied the right to change his or her or their nationality. This right to citizenship, the right to every individual to claim a nationality, is a fundamental human right. Being granted citizenship helps to protect humans from the violations of their human rights. Without it, human beings are placed into being vulnerable to losing access to laws and limitations placed on their violation of their right to exist as human beings. Often, people are granted citizenship of the country in which they are born in or reside in. This isn't always the case, though, and they are normally subject to the citizenship laws of that state. Those states must comply with a person's human rights concerning the granting or loss of nationality. In other words, how someone is treated as a person is directly equatable with their citizenship in many, many cases. But in practice, many people are often placed into precarious situations where they live currently offers them only various degrees of citizenship within their own country, and sometimes no citizenship at all. And again, this leaves them vulnerable to violations of their human rights and their ability to live. In late January 2020, the United States of America's Supreme Court upheld the Trump administration's public charge rule, which allows immigrants who use social safety net programs to be denied green cards, to be denied citizenship rights in the United States. This affects anyone who tries to get a green card in the United States, including any people who have worked many years to get one, including those who have attempted to gain a green card by having a family relationship with a US citizen, such as through marriage, for which over 800,000 green cards were granted in 2016. This also includes anyone who is being sponsored by a US employer, someone who works full-time for a US company and wants to remain here in the United States. of which there were 140,000 green cards granted per year. Under the public charge rule though, anyone who uses food stamps, Section 8 housing, and many other things, and most importantly for what we will be talking about later, medical benefits, can be denied access to a green card. Even more so, the Trump administration wants to change the definition of the public charge to be defined as anyone who is likely to use government benefits, not just someone who is using government benefits. Which means if they're younger than the age of 18, older than the age of 61, have more than one child, or are below a certain education or income level, or have any medical condition, this may put them up for being under the public charge rule and thus being able to be denied a green card. Up to 56% of all family-based green card applicants could be denied under this rule, and nearly half of all marriage green card applications. 71% of applicants from Central America, and that includes Mexico, will also be affected, and 52% of Asian Americans. Yet only 36% will be affected from Europe, showcasing a distinct racial and economic bias in these rules as well. Back in the world of Star Trek though, the XBs are looked down upon by their Romulan leaders, and are treated like second-class citizens. We see this distinction most disturbingly between Hugh and the other XBs, and most starkly and horrifically when the Romulan overseer Narissa slaughters the XBs without any worry or concern, but cannot harm Hugh because he is a Federation citizen. Hugh is protected because of his citizenship.
I would kill you too, but you're Federation. And you're protected by that asinine treaty.
But the other XBs are not, simply because of where they were de-assimilated. Right now, in this world, we are in a global crisis caused by the phage. And one of the most important things to do in the fight against the phage is that we need to properly and adequately test and identify all those afflicted with the phage, giving them access to care, and also teaching them to quarantine themselves so as to protect the rest of us from also getting the phage. Yet, due to the public charge rule, many potential green card applicants have avoided getting medical help for fear of losing their citizenship status, their chance to be protected as a US citizen later on down the road. They're left in this nebulous space, scared to get any care for potential infections lest they lose their possible immigration status. And as a result, these groups are less healthy and at risk of infectious diseases, including the phage. And with the United States as the current epicenter of the phage in the world at the time of me recording this video, the chance of them getting the phage increases every single day, and risks sweeping through these vulnerable communities. What's more, this puts everyone, not just these communities, at risk as well, with rising cases in the United States meaning more chances for everyone to get infected, not just those who are most vulnerable. The Trump administration, though, was completely aware of these risks. When the public charge rule was proposed, Homeland Security made the administration aware that immigrants, especially infants, children, and pregnant women, would be more at risk in these communities. That vaccination rates would go down, and even more importantly, that communicable diseases will be more prevalent. The threatening of these people to become second-class citizens or losing their ability to stay in the United States because of their lack of access to citizenship through this rule puts them at risk, and therefore it puts all of us at risk. On the Borg cube, the Romulans always saw the XBs as disposable. The Romulans viewed the XBs with contempt because of the Romulans' misguided cultural prejudice towards synthetics. Narissa and the Romulans thought they could get rid of XBs with ease, that they didn't need to care about them in the slightest other than how they were profitable to them. When the Borg began to pose a threat, they jettisoned them into space, something that each one of the rest of the surviving XBs could feel at that moment through their newly formed connection of a collective through 7 of 9. Yet while the XBs faced the brunt of the harm afflicted on their community, the Romulans were not unaffected, also suffering losses as a result of this horrific action, though usually through retaliation from the XBs standing up against their oppressors. The Trump administration during this crisis has not backed down from its racist viewpoints and actions. Instead, it has doubled down on them, calling this the Chinese phage, even going so far as to cross out the name of the phage and say China phage, in order to stoke a mentality of an in-group and an out-group, that we must protect ourselves first over others, that only certain people are to blame, not us. Asian Americans, who are actually citizens in the United States, reported 650 racist attacks in the last week at the time of me writing this video. Asian Americans have also reported being spit on, threatened, which, by the way, being spit on increases your risk of infection. They have been placed lower on the need for health care. These are American citizens, mind you, yet they are being seen as the outgroup. This on top of the groups that are already worried about losing their green card status, which, like I said, includes a lot of people from Asia. Yet by making non-citizens and those of certain ethnic groups targets of ire, to be left to handle this phage with less help, less defenses, it again, like I said, makes us all more vulnerable. The phage can ravage these communities, harming them even more, and then they have less access to get more help. And then it can spread to even more Americans, and then more people around the world, continually perpetuating this crisis over and over again to just fill in this silly, it's us versus them mentality. By denying access to healthcare options, we make those without US citizenship more vulnerable. By calling this thing the Chinese phage, we are saying that others are to blame, not us, and it makes us easier to just see them getting the virus as their fault, and that we don't have to care. But that's not how a virus works. A virus doesn't discriminate. It affects each and every one of us equally if we get it, and even if we don't, it affects our family members, our friends. But it does not matter where this virus came from. It does not matter where you were born.
This virus is the great equalizer.
But that's not entirely true, because this virus isn't the great equalizer. A virus may not discriminate, but we do. Because even beyond immigrants and Asian Americans, this phage has highlighted the United States' decades-long systemic inequality. According to WBEZ, despite only being 29% of the city's population, 70% of phage deaths in Chicago have been black people. Despite making up 40% of Michigan's deaths, black people account for only 14% of their population. And it's the same story in Louisiana, where 70% of lives lost have been black people, though they're only 30% of the population. From a lack of access to healthcare, to an inability to shelter in place in such compact and public transit-focused communities, to pollutions, to many other factors, these communities have been put in situations where they are way more vulnerable to this pandemic than they should have been. Than they could have been. This is not Americans versus everyone else or Americans first. It's not about everyone for themselves. It's about all of us working together. Right now is what Star Trek has always been about. Recognizing that diversity makes us stronger together than against each other. If we band together, work together, see each other as equals in this fight, it makes us all safer and stronger. And it makes us all more likely to survive, to maybe one day see that Star Trek future. We are all citizens of Earth. We are all human beings. That's something that Hugh on Star Trek Picard knew. He recognized the XBs as just as human regardless of their citizenship. And I hope that that idea is something that we can all take away during this crisis.
That's the whole point, to save each other.
Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, I got a little bit more angry and frustrated during that video than I have in most of my other ones, but again, I think it's really important that we talk about this. If you want to learn more about all the stuff that I talked about, there's some information down in the doobly-doo. Also, like I said and mentioned at the top, I am a little bit worried about my finances at the moment, so if you want to help me support make more of these videos, and if you like things like this and discussions of politics and cultural ideas through Star Trek and geek topics, please consider, number one, giving my channel a subscribe, and number two, helping me out over on Patreon. Every little bit helps, and you get some cool perks like your name in videos and call-outs in videos, and maybe even access to some videos early if I can get those up in time. It would really, really mean a lot to me at this time if you could do that. But regardless of whether if you can subscribe or if you can give to my Patreon page, I'm just really glad that you stopped by, and I hope that you, as always, especially right now, live long and prosper. And special thanks to my commander level and above Patreons, especially right now, Eli Bergmas, Stefan Schuhart, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Lal Lindley, Marika Kuyechin, Munir Amlani, and Mystic the Monakit.